computer, so it had to reload everything. So I'm Anna Nekaris, and how we're going to run today's session is I'm going to be joined by two of my colleagues who I'm working with Javan slow loris conservation. One is, and they've been introduced already. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give a presentation, a little bit about slow and slender lorises, and then we will move on to the second part where we have a kind of a panel where we will be discussing aspects more of conservation. And then you all can ask questions as far as I know in the last half an hour. Once we get into the panel part, however, if you have questions at any time, we won't be sharing the screen anymore. So you can make that really interactive and you could already start asking questions, but we have kind of a set of information we're ready to talk about during that period. And so I wasn't really sure how to structure this talk because I didn't want to just give a normal research talk about a particular topic that I was working on. So I've decided to give you what I've called an A to Z primer of all things loris. And I'm going to share my screen now, and we're going to go through what you don't know, what you think you know, and what we now know about slow and slender lorises. So let's see, how do I share my screen? I think if I just go here, it will work. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to go here. No, that's not working. There we go. So if you do have any questions about this talk, you can email me. I will try to answer. I get about 400 emails a day. You can also find me on Twitter at Queen Fireface. So you can also send a tweet, which might be easier for me to find. And also, I'll show you some other information at the end. We have a website for the project, and we have lots of other social media. We are also at Oxford Brookes University, where we teach an MSc. We have a big primate conservation program, so I'll be talking a little bit about that as well. So actually, when I started writing this talk, the truth is, in a lot of ways, few people care about lorises. I can't tell you, since the early 1990s, when I started working on lorises, when I first wanted to study them, I went to my university lecturer, and they were like, I don't know what that is. And so we looked up a very classic textbook, and the only strepsirrhine we could find in the textbook were ring-tailed lemurs. I actually then pulled off my shelf some of the most recent primatology textbooks, and these are very prominent best-selling textbooks. And here's what we can learn about slow and slender lorises in the first one. There are 8 lines in 450 pages about slow and slender lorises, and they are not referring to podos when the author says they're found in Africa and Asia. So it's actually not even correct. In the second prominent textbook, there are 3 lines in about 400 pages. Sorry, that should say 3 pages, that one. Lemurs get 14 pages. No, it is 3 lines. Lemurs get 14 pages, and slow and slender lorises get 3 lines, and they're in a number of tables, and their genus name for the slow loris is not even spelled correctly. It's Nyctibebus. And only 4 of the 7 species recognized at the time were included in this book. And then we finally get and I'm not naming or shaming in these very famous textbooks, but in the very final one, we actually get 3 whole pages, not 3 lines or 8 lines. And although that seems awesome, lemurs still get 20 pages. And it is more up to date, and they have a few things right, which I'm going to be talking about today, like that slow lorises eat gum. They have a few things wrong, saying slow lorises eat fruits and sleep in tree holes. And they had quite a lot right about slender lorises. So what does that mean? It says someone is asking to annotate the shared content. I guess that's fine. I don't really know what that means. Ooh, what happened?
So that there's captioning for those who need it.
Okay, I now can't change slides. How do I could see my whole screen now. That's weird. Whatever's happened, I can no longer change slides. Because all I could see is like some editing thing and pencils, and maybe I should have said no. How do I get rid of that?
Our DE host, would you be able to remove that feature so that we can continue on?
Sorry about that. Oh, I started drawing on it now.
Yeah. Okay, I'm looking for that right now. I don't know who turned that on.
It's very cool if you are the annotator, like if you're taking notes, but I'm just stuck. What is that thing
The
do?
best bet would be to stop sharing and reshare your content one more time.
Okay, let me try to find out how to do that. The trouble is it's stuck. Here we go. How do I'm trying. Sorry, everyone. I'm trying to hover. Something appeared. Okay. Share, stop sharing. Okay, share screen. Let's try it again. Oh gosh. It still has this feature on. Okay, at least it's moving now. Okay, I'm going to decline whatever that is. Here we go. So, but it's not quite true that nobody cares about lorises. But what is interesting, when I started studying lorises back, I started my master's in 1994, and there were only a handful of people working on lorises at that time. But these are all covers of a number of my master students, MPhil students, and PhD students who subsequently worked on lorises. And recently I published with Annie Burroughs for the first time a Cambridge University Press book on lemurs, lorises, and pottos. And we actually were able to get more than 40 contributors who now care about these animals. So hopefully in the next rendition of these textbooks, they will become more than 3 lines. And hopefully today you'll see just how diverse lorises are and how interesting they are. So what have we learned about lorises that the textbooks aren't telling us? There's going to be an A to Z of loris facts, and I wrote it in a peculiar order because you would normally start with like how many species there are, but we may not get to that till we get to the letter S. And then we're going to have a panel discussion, as I said, with team members from the Little Fireface Project, working more on conservation and some ecology, and then questions and answers from all of you. So we start with letter A. And essentially, one of the really cool things about lorises is you could study almost anything with them because there are so many interesting things about them. Aposematic coloring is essentially a type of warning coloring, and it's not so common among the primates, but it's common among many other animals, and especially among, well, it's also common among several types of mammals, but especially among insects, it's very common. But what we looked at, what was interesting with slow lorises, is in the Javan slow loris, you see, if you could see my little pointer, you have a baby here, a young one, and an adult on the other side. And the babies are much, much darker. And yes, in many primate species, young ones are different colors than adults. But what we looked at was there a function to this? Actually, lorises are venomous. You're going to learn more about that at letter V. But we actually looked at how aggressive the lorises were. We looked at if they were heavily wounded or not, if they were male or female, how heavy they were. This is also related to their age. We looked at if they were captured more or not for radio coloring. If you, say, got more used to being captured, were you less aggressive? And what we found is, in fact, males were far more aggressive than females. Aggressive animals had fewer wounds because they were probably so good at fighting, they don't get wounded as much. And also younger animals were still more aggressive than all of them. And we also found that younger animals are the ones that are about to be dispersing from home, and there could be advantages to advertising the fact that they're venomous. So they have this very cool dark coloring that distinguishes them from adults, which through all of this research, we were able to say was an aposematic or a warning signal. Why this is also interesting in particular is in the old days, looking at museum specimens of slow lorises, this animal was considered to look so different from this one, it was described as a different species. And nocturnal animals often don't use vision to tell each other apart. And so if a nocturnal animal looks so different that you can kind of isolate it from others, that's a good sign that they probably are different species. But here's an unusual case where it's just the young ones look so much different from the older ones. And we have to be cautious, in this case, looking at museum specimens. So we move on to B. And B is linking something to conservation. And we are using bridges in our field site in Indonesia to study slow loris conservation. They're made out of hose pipes that also facilitate space for farmers. And what we did is we wanted to actually see if we gave lorises bridges, could they change their home ranges? And we found that, in fact, lorises use bridges to access new feeding trees, to avoid going to the ground, and actually to expand parts of their home range they couldn't reach before. So in addition to having conservation benefits and habitat benefits, the fact that it's an animal willing to go on and use a bridge is very, very interesting, and the ecological impact of them is also interesting. C is for conservation status. When I started studying slow lorises, they were all considered least concern. And in fact, going to that nobody cares about lorises, I went to my first IUCN Red List meeting in 2006, and I asked some of the people present there if they had lorises at their field site or in their rescue center, and their comments were, we only care about the important primates. Or, you know, like I went to that market to see if there were animals for sale there, but there were only lorises. There was nothing important there. There are so many lorises in the wildlife markets that they can't possibly be endangered. But what we know now is lorises are edge species. They're very easy to trap on forest edges, and they're very easy to trap when we have complete deforestation. And I'm going to talk more about how they're traded during the rest of my AID. But in this case, we can see that of the 9 recognized species, I don't have slender lorises on here. So we have 2 critically endangered, the Javan slow loris and the Banca slow loris. We have 3 vulnerable species. This one is the Philippine slow loris. This is the Cayenne River slow loris, and this is the Bornean slow loris. And then we have several that are endangered. I should say in the vulnerable species, we don't have any slender lorises. We have Sri Lankan slender lorises as endangered, Indian slender lorises as least threatened. And then here in the endangered, we have pygmy lorises, the Sumatran loris, the Bengal slow loris, and the greater slow loris. And this one, Nycticebus menegensis insularis, which is a red list assessment in my inbox right now that's happening because it is a genetically newly identified subspecies of slow loris from Tioman Island. So we're finding new lorises and they're still being red listed. So lorises are no longer least concern. They are all globally threatened. Also interesting, and it's going to be interesting from a conservation perspective, is dispersal. When I first started studying slow lorises, the literature said, actually, in fact, slender lorises only moved 10 meters a night, and slow lorises lived in 1 tree. And what we know now is, for example, in dispersal, they can move 2 to 6 kilometers. Also, even in zoos today, they're still separating young slow lorises from their parents, often before they're even a year old. Our infants usually don't disperse until they're at least 20 months. This 18 months is rare instances of some individuals getting disrupted and dispersing, but they often don't disperse till they're 3 years old. So these are animals that are actually really going into their sexual maturity at a much later age than we expected. And one thing we were able to look at dispersal for is because slow lorises are highly globally threatened. One of the main reasons for that is illegal wildlife trade. A lot of these animals end up in rescue centers and get released to the wild. And in the beginning, they would release an animal somewhere and it would travel very far from the release sites. This is because this is sort of natural dispersal in a loris. You're looking for somewhere to settle. And we were able to look at a number of characteristics. Like here, we could look at the home range size of a stable animal, which could be anywhere from 3 to 5 hectares, a dispersing animal, which could be around 15 hectares, or a translocated animal, one that we're releasing to the wild, which is looking more like a dispersing animal. What we found, however, is dispersing animals settled a lot quicker than translocated animals. And often translocated animals never settled and they died in the process of the stress of looking for somewhere to settle. And so here you can also see how alert an animal is and how affected they are by human presence and how habituated they are to humans. Also their health status, how healthy they look. Like this is a very healthy animal that dispersed successfully. This was a really oily, sick looking animal that did not disperse successfully. We could actually start to predict with these factors what would predict a successful dispersal. And this also helps with these translocations or releases to the wild. So that's our D. We move on to E. We're still into slow lorises. Don't worry, we're getting into some slender lorises eventually. Slender lorises do eat a bit of exudates, but nothing like a slow loris. Slow loris has these incredible hands that grip onto, oh goodness, large substrates. They have a very long intestine with a long cecum that helps them to digest gums. They have a stout tooth comb that helps them gouge. Look at all these holes in the tree. So there's holes, 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 hundreds of them. This is a baby here that made hundreds of holes in the tree. And they're incredible gouging machines. These are all Javan slow lorises. This is the Bengal slow loris, which has even more exudates in its diet, up to 90%. These guys are eating about 70% of gums in their diet. And everything about them is essentially hyper specialized to eat gum, and they eat it all year round. It's not a fallback food. And they could even eat gums that are incredibly toxic to other animals or to humans. And why this is important is, again, we have a lot of these guys in illegal wildlife trade. When we're releasing them to the wild, they have to have appropriate gum trees available in order for them to survive. And when they're in illegal wildlife trade, they often have their teeth clipped out to prevent their venomous bite, which means they can no longer gouge for gum, which means they starve to death. Yet this is something, despite the fact we've published numerous papers on this, it's not been taken up often by rescue centers, which still feed them inappropriate diets. And it's often considered still in zoos as an enrichment and not a food that they should be eating. And we found that in rescue centers, animals with given more access to gum, they do better at release. They're healthier, their teeth are healthier. And animals in captivity, they have a better reproductive output when they are given gum diets. Slow lorises are not always slow, especially in their locomotion. This whole idea of them moving 10 meters a night is ridiculous, and I'm going to try to show you a YouTube video. Oh no. Well, I can't show you a YouTube video. It doesn't really matter. I can't get back. How do I get back to fast? There we are. Okay, it evidently doesn't work in this format, but there is a link there, and you could go to our YouTube channel, which is Little Fireface Project on YouTube. And on that YouTube channel, we have an incredibly fast slender loris, an incredibly fast pygmy slow loris, and an incredibly fast Javan slow loris that can move with incredible speed. And in fact, back in 2007, we wrote an article, All Lorises Are Not Slow, and we were able to show that even the slender loris, it can move as fast as a squirrel. They can't jump, but they can move very fast. So they're not all slow. They grow up slowly. This is something that we knew a lot from captivity. We know that the slender loris, they have babies the weight of 9 paper clips when they're born after a 6-month gestation period. Interestingly, 6 months gestation is something that characterizes slow, slender, and pygmy lorises. It's around the same. All of these guys, I've studied all of these species in the wild. I studied the slender lorises in South India and then in 2 sites in Sri Lanka. I studied the pygmy loris in Cambodia, and now I'm studying the Javan slow loris in Indonesia. And all 3 of those species I've studied with radio collars. And what's interesting about all of them is they carry their babies for about 1 month, maybe 2 months. And here you see a really big baby on its mother still being lugged around. She might carry it just for short periods of time, but they are parked for about 2 to 6 months, and they literally sit around and do nothing for 2 to 6 months. And they start exploring their home ranges. And here you see, you know, this is the age that they're only starting to learn about their home range, that in zoos they might be sent off to breed. But in the wild, they take quite a long time to grow up. And and they're very cute. So they're very cute animals, which you'll see as a big problem for them as well. They are incredibly diverse in their habitat choices. You see a slender loris here in the rainforests of Sri Lanka. Interestingly, this loris tardigratis, the red slender loris, it's pretty much a rainforest specialist, whereas the gray slender loris, Loris lidicarianus, can adapt to more human habitats and even lives, for example, in the city of Bangalore in India, in the parks. Here you see the habitat of the pygmy slow loris, indicating it kind of likes tree fall zones, so it can live in more disturbed habitats. And here you see where we're working with Javan slow lorises. It's a tea plantation with little trees that boundary the edge that they can move through. So they're very diverse. Where they don't really live is in primary forest or late stage secondary growth forest that doesn't provide all of this connectivity. And that causes some problems for their conservation status because they're often not having good populations in protected areas. They have good populations in unprotected areas where they're more likely to be hunted. Here we move on to our slender lorises. They have been chronically fed fruits in captivity, which has caused them all sorts of illness. And in the wild, the gray slender loris eats about 90% insects, and the red slender loris eats about 100% insects. And not just insects. Here you see a picture from Chaminda Jayasekara, who works in the north of Sri Lanka, and he's got a wonderful picture here of a slow loris eating a bird. So I've seen this in the wild as well, and I've seen it in their feces. And we do know that when you keep them in captivity and you think it's a good idea to keep your loris in a menagerie with birds, it becomes the bird slaughter cage. So really extreme diets among these guys. We also know that, I hope this video works because it's very cute. It's a cheesy video that we made for our YouTube channel trying to attract people with cute baby slow loris fluff. But here you see three subadults. Basically, it's a few-month-old, a 1-year-old, and a 2-year-old from the same social group all playing together. So as I said, they often don't disperse till they're 3-year-olds. So you could have a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, a 1-year-old, and a newborn. And they're very, very social. And if we look at the frequency of play bouts across age categories, we could see that all the age categories play. And that play is very important for slow lorises. I can also say my work on slender lorises, they were incredibly social. In fact, if we looked at percentage of time social, it was up to 40% of their time they were with other animals. And this is something we also see in the slow lorises. We could really argue they are not solitary. We could maybe say semi-solitary, but they're frequently and nightly engaged in intensive social behaviors that once you have good lights and good night vision, you can get a really good view of it. And this kinship ties, they're very important for things like learning. This is a paper we recently published in Animal Behavior, which looks at co-feeding and how animals, this is Javan slow loris again. And I must say, we're in our 10th year of our study of Javan slow loris, continually following the same animals every night. So we have better data for them than we have for any other species. But again, looking at some of these other species, we've seen some of the same trends. And here you can see that different types of food, be it gum here, insects, nectar, or flowers, if you're feeding on it with other animals, it changes according to the number of days. And this is about the dispersal time. So we start to see things level off around dispersal time. And so early on, you're learning how to eat really toxic insects. Early on, again, potentially toxic gums. Flowers, they're a lot harder to manipulate and they're a more sophisticated food. So you co-feed on that a bit later. And the same thing with the nectar from flowers. So we have co-feeding and we have different ages at which these animals are learning to eat their food. I've already alluded to the fact that these guys have large home ranges. They're often kept in teeny tiny cages in a zoo, but if we actually compare their home ranges and their social organization, which tends to be unimale, unifemale, they're very similar to gibbons. So if you see gibbons in a cage in a zoo and a slow loris in a cage in a zoo or a slender loris, you'll notice the huge difference in the size. And one thing we know with slender lorises and slow lorises in zoos, they often kill each other and fight dramatically. And if you're having a 10-hectare, even if you're having a 5-hectare home range in the wild, a 3-hectare home range in the wild, which again overlaps with all the range of the different gibbons, and you're put in an aquarium, you might fight with your neighbors because that's a really unnatural situation to be squeezed into. This is just a funny thing that I decided to put in for M, to have a mouse playtime. Here you have a slow loris, and here you have a mouse. And we frequently see them grooming each other and playing with each other, even though the slow loris could eat the mouse. Here you have a juvenile orangutan playing with a slow loris. Again, they can eat each other. In Sumatra, they eat each other. There's now been a sighting in Borneo of a slow loris and being eaten by an orangutan, but they can also play together. And this is a macaque grooming a giant squirrel, but this is something we frequently saw in Sri Lanka, was macaques grooming slender lorises. And so there's interesting, cute behavior that happens with them as well. Surprisingly, they are nocturnal, or not surprisingly, they're nocturnal. We've installed these accelerometer devices on our slow lorises, and we recently published a paper in Nature Scientific Reports looking at the fact that they are completely nocturnal. So all the red is the daytime, and they're sound asleep, and they are completely nocturnal and active at night. So they're not cathemeral at all. They're properly nocturnal animals. For O, I put obesity, because again, we've already mentioned these guys are horrendously misfed in captivity. They're often kept as pets. These are all images of YouTube videos of pet lorises. We analyzed over 100 of them, and we found that not only are these animals ill and often really fat, but that most of these videos violate all 5 freedoms of animal behavior. And so if you are ever thinking, oh, but it's so cute. Well, actually, if you are really obese like this animal, you're an arboreal tree-dwelling animal and you're flat on a board, you're out in the daylight, and you're fed fruit, which makes you ill and die. These are all violating the 5 animal freedoms, and obesity is just one of those problems in these videos that go viral, and many people, their only view of a slow loris is through those videos. And here are some of the same videos in color. These guys are not pets. They are protected on Appendix 1 of CITES. I was the main scientist in 2007 to help write a proposal to get slow lorises transferred to Appendix 1 of CITES. And it precludes all trade, including pet trade. Before, in certain countries where it was legal to have slow lorises as pets, there was heavy trade for slow lorises. And if we look, for example, at an animal like this, it's a Javan slow loris. Ooh, sorry about that. Wrong way. It's completely protected, and it has never been legal to export one anywhere. This happens to be a Javan slow loris in Java. It's an Indonesian video, and it's illegal to have them there as well. But here you could see lorises are also venomous. And here's this little baby loris. I said they're more aggressive. They're actually probably more venomous, or don't know how to meter their venom, with someone's lovely chihuahua. And if that loris bites the chihuahua can die. So people are a bit silly also having venomous primates as pets. Q, I bet you thought I couldn't come up with a Q. My Twitter handle and my Instagram handle is Queen Fireface. And I was really lucky back in 2011 to make an amazing film for the natural world and Animal Planet called Jungle Gremlins of Java. And this really helped to bring this horrible illegal pet trade to the rest of the world. And we use our social media to try to give images like this. Rice is not Laura's food, tree gum is. This is not a Laura's home, or this is a Laura's home, not this. And one of the things that was very interesting is after that film showed, here you could see the very famous tickling slow loris video, which was shown in the previous slide, or is it this one? Yeah, this one here, of a little pygmy loris illegally imported into Russia, where it's legal to have a loris as a pet, but not legal to have one that's illegally imported. This video has gone incredibly viral. It's in memes, it's on GIFs, it's everywhere. I'm a cute little slow loris and I love to party. I like to move it, everything you could think of. Well, actually, interestingly, the night this film showed, the number of comments on that YouTube video skyrocketed, with more awareness that they were poisonous or venomous, with more awareness their teeth are pulled out to make them quote unquote suitable pets, and the main uploader of that video removed it. There are many copies, however. Releases. I have a couple of things to say about releases, but just releases for slow lorises are actually a major threat. Here you see a poor old slow loris, it's here, being released in the daytime with a crowd of people all taking photographs. Oh, it's so lovely, we're releasing the loris. Most of them don't have health checks. Most of them are not even the right species, or many of them aren't the right species. We have a huge population of pygmy slow lorises that have been released into Thailand, which is not even a range country. So it's a really, really big problem, and I'll talk more about that in a second on another slide, because I kind of wanted to finish this sooner than later so we could do the panel. Species. I showed you quite a few species. When I started studying slow lorises in the 90s, there were 2 slow loris species and 1 slender loris species. I elevated 1 slender loris species back to species. It was kind of named over 100 years ago, and they're incredibly different. I've recently named several slow loris species, re-elevating them or naming a new one in one case. And here you see the Bengal slow loris. They're very, very variable. They occur from India all the way to the Philippines, where you have many tarsiers, where you have many macaques, where you have many colobus monkeys or colobine monkeys, where you have many gibbons and multiple genera of gibbons. But we have a single Bengal slow loris that ranges from 650 grams to 2.5 kilos, and it is considered a single species. Again, nobody cares about slow lorises. So we're working on this problem and trying to see, are they actually species? But they have colonized those parts of Asia much earlier than some of the gibbons, the macaques, and the langurs. So we would expect they should be more distinct than we currently know. That would be a great project for any of you listening, because they occur in so many countries. You could keep naming species. They go into torpor. This was an article recently coming out of the Vietnam Primate Center, which has pygmy slow lorises. And we knew lemurs went into torpor, but we now know lorises also go into torpor. We've also done a similar study that's in preparation to be published at our study site, where we know Javan slow lorises also go into torpor. And so this is dropping their temperature incredibly. So here you see dropping the body temperature to below 10 degrees and staying that way for several hours. And it's quite funny, even in zoos, sometimes lorises fall off the branch and they get brought to the vet because people think they're sick, and they actually realize the animals have gone into torpor. And so keeping animals, again, in captivity and giving them a wide variety of temperatures is really important. Another thing is that lorises are often thought to be quiet. Slender lorises emit a whistle, which they can emit hundreds of times per night, but they don't do it so often in captivity. Slow lorises, they thought they pretty much didn't make any sounds at all. But when we went out with a cool bat detector recording device, we found they're making ultrasonic calls all the time. And so here you see the frequency in kilohertz is 45 to 50 kilohertz, which is a very high-pitched ultrasonic call. And they can do this amongst their family groups. So you have this group of mother, father, and up to their 4 offspring calling to each other all night, letting each other know where they are. And we suspect even in the slender lorises, they probably also use this ultrasonic communication, because they magically kind of find each other and you don't know how. And there was no sound made, but it was probably an ultrasonic sound. Lorises are venomous. They're very cool. Slow lorises are venomous. Pygmy lorises are venomous. There's no evidence that slender lorises are. There are only 7 mammals that are venomous, so it's pretty rare in the mammal kingdom. And they are also incredibly territorial. So they use their venom against each other in interspecific competition to defend territories. There you see a saliva pooling in the mouth that contains toxin that it can be activated on its own. It can even cause an animal to die if it licks itself to death. It can cause a person to go into different sorts of illnesses just by touching a loris, like getting blood in their urine, having a severe reaction to the skin. When they mix that with a brachial oil in a gland in their arm, it creates a venom that can cause anaphylactic shock in people and causes this heavy necrosis you see here in this young individual. Remember I said young individuals are the dispersing ones and more likely to fight. And so this guy was a very, very aggressive, very successful male that rarely ever had wounds. He had one instance, but anyway, you see the wounds are pretty terrible, and they get worse. They get to the point where the animal can lose all the skin on their entire head. They are also victims of wildlife trade, so every type of loris is traded. Here you see slender loris. They're used in types of black magic ritual. They may be used by fortune tellers to pick cards out of decks. They are used in some medicinal trade. Their eyes are, a lot of things with lorises are animistic. Their eyes are considered to have properties, and their eyes that maybe burst to collect tears. Here you see the pet trade. These are some lorises hanging upside down above a civet. Here you see the medicinal trade. And throughout Indochina, slow and pygmy lorises have over 100 uses in traditional medicines. After you've used them for everything else, you might use them as a key ring, which is a talisman to ward off all sorts of evil. And if that's not bad enough, you can be made an Instagram star by being stolen from your habitat, paraded on a Thai beach, fed cocktail cherries, and then taken photos with Rihanna, who had the post, "Look who's talking dirty to me" on this post. She was annihilated on social media in the first 24 hours of this post, got her manager involved, and it became Rihanna saved 2 slow lorises. And the slow lorises were confiscated. The people were not arrested. They were let go on the street the next day. The slow lorises were put in a rescue center where I think one of them still is alive and the other one died, and no one ever gave any money for these animals. And the touts who touted them were allowed to go straight back with new slow lorises on the street. So they made it into a Rihanna rescue story, where in fact most people just see this picture and say, I want to hold one too. So it's a really big problem, all of these different aspects of wildlife trade. I bet you thought I couldn't get an X. It's Xena. She's our warrior princess. She's our most successfully released female. She was found on a rooftop in a village, or more in a town, where it was believed she was an escaped pet. And she actually was released. She actually reproduced. She ousted one of my favorite females from her home range. We introduced her in an area where none of our resident animals were, but animals dispersed kilometers from where you release them. She ended up in our study area. She kicked out this lovely loris called Sibao, took over Sibao's home range, and now she's had several babies. What the point of that is you'll see lots of horrific, for me, they're horrific, press releases. Amazing moment, 20 lorises released in the wild for the first time. Our 20 lorises live in a few hundred hectares of forest, 20 adult lorises. Their home ranges are like 10 hectares. When you release them all in a single spot, they will either kill the resident lorises, they'll kill each other, they will starve to death. So releasing 20 animals in one place is never a good thing. Yet they're used to do fundraising, and these releases are done without any biological science. So it's very frustrating. Y is for youth empowerment. We do a lot of conservation education in our project. This is a book we wrote called Slow Loris Forest Protector, and we will be, there's a paper that's written, a couple of papers assessing the impact of that book. And one of the things that was really, really important to me when I wrote this book is a lot of conservationists who write children's books think they need to fill their books with doom and gloom. This is called ecophobia. And it's been shown in many studies in conservation education that children who are told all the negative things, like their teeth are ripped out, they're in illegal wildlife trade, they feel helpless and they will shut down and not engage in conservation activities. So this book was all about just a lovely story of a slow loris mother and her baby, and teaching kids about loris ecology in a sweet way in the cultural context, with no gloom and doom and nothing bad. And I can't tell you the number of children who've loved this book, who've learned to love about lorises, and the number of conservationists who've been very negative to me, going, why didn't you put death in it? Why is there no cage in it? Why is there no illegal wildlife trade in it? And I said, would you read your 5-year-old, 6-year-old niece a book about horrible wildlife trade? And then I ask, who got sad at The Lion King? Who got sad at Bambi? When just an animal dies off screen. I would never watch Bambi again. Yet they want us to put children's books full of horror to give to kids who may have never owned a book before. So think about that if you're going to be doing conservation education. And here you see a cool thing called the structural equation model that we use just to look at empowerment of our Indonesian and Western volunteers who came to work at our project over the last 10 years. And so there's all sorts of things that people really learned and felt personal growth and learning about ecology and learning about nature, and were able to study lorises in the wild. The last one is zoos, and here you see the Cleveland Zoo in America is one of my great funders, and they actually put a pygmy loris on their carousel, a really cool way to do outreach. And this is a video from Sheldon Wildlife Trust. We've been working with them to look about putting these accelerometers on lorises and to validate the behavior of the accelerometers. And they've been using really cool touch training and positive reinforcement. So their loris volunteers at the zoo can wear collars without ever being caught, and it becomes part of their training and part of their enrichment. So you could do super cool things with zoos. And that brings me to most of my funders are either small conservation organizations or zoos, and I really appreciate all their amazing help. Here you see the website, nocturama.org. You could also get to us at littlefireface.org. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Where else are we? I don't know, Pinterest and stuff. And if you're interested in the MSc Primate Conservation at Oxford Brookes, you could search for that as well. And we are now, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now, I think. And look, if Ahmad is here and Marco is here. So I don't know how we could see Ahmad and I see Marco. I don't see Ahmad. Is Ahmad on the list? Well, even if Ahmad is not here, is he
Hello.
here? Hi, Marco. So what we were going to do now was try to have a kind of panel discussion. Oh, there you are. Hi. So I can introduce Marco and Ahmad. So Marco's a postdoctoral research fellow So we work in Indonesia, and we have a number of members of our team. We have coordinators, volunteers, researchers, research assistants, and Marco's a postdoctoral research fellow. And one of his main goals has been to work on something I haven't talked about at all, which is wildlife-friendly coffee, working with farmers and empowering farmers to reforest and improve their land and their farming practices for wildlife. And Ahmad is doing his MSc, right, at Wageningen in the Netherlands. And for a couple of years, he was what we called our wildlife trade officer. So it was his job to go to all the markets and actually record illegal wildlife trade. He actually has a class to go to in about 20 minutes. So Ahmad, I just hoped you could, if you want to introduce any more about yourself, but I think the crowd might be really interested in just your feelings and what it was like when you first started doing the market surveys and how you felt doing the market surveys and that sort of thing.
Yeah, maybe I can start. Maybe I can start.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I've been working with Professor Anna since like 2018, I think. Yeah, and because my background is as a wildlife conservation, so mainly I doing this kind of behavioral monitoring job with orangutan and then with other big animals. But when I joined the NS project, I will be like overwhelmed, like because my main job's basically just going to the market to collect the animal, what's in there and how is that condition in there, and then yeah, just to be pretended I'm the buyer. Sometimes also I get, you know, what are you gonna do? Are you willing? Are you gonna buy one of this my animals? And yeah, so just this kind of offensive sometimes just really struck me down. But I really understanding what's behind of my main duties and responsibilities. So yeah, I'm really get used to it, and now I'm here. So that I'm now doing a master of forest and natural conservation, and I hope this study will provide me kind of more understanding on the social and policy perspective on the wildlife conservation. So yeah.
Can you just describe what the markets are for? Why are all these markets in Java? Like, why are all these animals for sale culturally? And what does it look like when you walk into the market?
Yeah, actually, there is the reason why the market has been really growing in the Java and other parts of Indonesia, because culturally we believe that in the Javanese culture, there is kind of four things that we have to own. Like one of them is the birds, because it will give us like kind of a fortune, like ability to be successful. So that's why this market started growing. But not just birds, but others animals are also included, such as civets, macaques, and then another exotic birds like iguana and other things. Yeah, when you about to like visit this market, usually you just found really filthy and then yeah, crowded animals everywhere. There is no kind of maintenance and like health procedure to how these animals are maintained. So yeah, it's pretty horrible to be like there. Sometimes because I spend at least like 1 to 2 hours during the market survey, because there are a lot of animals. At least like I counted like 200 or 400 individuals. Yeah, so yeah, I got this very sad feeling when I was there. So yeah.
I want Marco to speak as well, but I just want to make sure if anyone does have any questions for Ahmad about the wildlife trade surveys, if that's something you've been really interested in. I could kind of see a chat. I could see a few questions. It's very confusing. How does it work? How can I make it bigger? I think there's, oh gosh, yeah, so if you do have any questions, you could always put them in the chat or you can ask. But yeah, so I guess what I would like to say is what we always would what we want to do with our Little Fireface project. Little Fireface comes from the Sundanese word for slow loris, which is mukageni. And we want to work with local people to try to work with loris conservation, get people to understand about the animals. We want to know about the animals' ecology, but then we also want to do more worldwide empowerment to get people to stop with this horrendous illegal wildlife trade. So we have the illegal wildlife trade component that you just heard a bit about, but then we also have this local education and empowerment, which Marco can mention a bit about. So do you want to talk a little bit about wildlife friendly coffee? And let me know, Marco has 3 slides as well. Let me know when you want me to show the slides. Maybe you could introduce yourself first.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, I'm Marco Campera. I'm a research fellow here at Oxford Brookes University. I've been working with Anna since 2018. And before I worked like in Madagascar for years. So you might see me in some lemur papers as well. So I can compare like different prosimians, let's say. So my main job here at LFP is like to work with farmers. So we started like this wildlife-friendly coffee production in 2019. I started that, although there were some bases before, like there were some censuses with the farmers before. There was an agroforestry project before that, so there was already the basis, like to communicate with the farmers. But when I arrived in Indonesia was 2019. So I mainly promoted like organic and wildlife-friendly practices with farmers to promote like long-term sustainability of the agroforestry system. So that was the biggest aim. So not only slow lorises will benefit from that, but also all the other animals and wildlife in farming. So because not only slow lorises are living in those agroforestry systems, there are some other like leopard cats, civets, many birds. We are working on many insects, for example. So we did surveys on butterflies, pollinators. So we are doing the surveys of all the possible like biodiversity, like in these agroforestry systems, especially associated with the coffee farms. So we are mainly comparing the farms like in terms of how, I mean, what is the biodiversity like in conventional farms, for example, like shade grown with fertilizers, and sun grown with fertilizers versus the shade grown with organic fertilizers, so like more sustainable wildlife friendly farms. So that is my main research area now. So sustainability and wildlife friendly coffee. So we got after 2 years of works, we got
Marco,
yeah.
While you're speaking, there's already a question about like, can you describe the actual certification? Because somebody is asking, how do you know if a project was sustainably sourced? So maybe you can explain that wildlife friendly is a certification.
So what is peculiar about our project is that we are one of the 26 projects in the world that have been certified by this Wildlife Friendly Enterprise Network. That is a specific certification for projects that are doing something on biodiversity protection. So we got like hunting ban, and we got like promoting like organic farming. So that is the main reason why we got this certification, is because our conservation efforts, and the farming is directly into conservation. So it's providing benefits for critically endangered species, such as the Javan slow lorises. And so that is the main reason, but also there are other aspects of the certification, for example, like fair trade. And the other thing that we are very peculiar is that we are directly linked with farmers. So that is very specific of our project. So there are not many coffee that you can find that is from direct trade, and linking like direct trade with wildlife conservation is like very peculiar. So we are trying now to open the market for like this product in the UK first, because we got the certification like in October last year, and the next harvest will be like in May this year. So we are trying now to export to the UK the coffee from our farmers and launch like this new certification in the UK. So to see like to understand like if the people appreciate this certification, because there are many certifications like around the world, like eco labels. So not all of them have clear like outcomes, especially for conservation and for farmers. So we believe that our product is very specific because we have proof of direct benefits for conservation and for the farmers. And that is why we would like to launch this product first in the UK. So we won't have a big mass production because it's only from 400 farmers that live in the agroforestry system where we work for now. But then we want to expand that to other areas in Indonesia. Yeah.
I just wanted to say also, because I realize Ahmad has to go in like 5 minutes. So I wanted to kind of be back and forth. I'm sorry, my dog is loud. There was a question I think that Ahmad should answer, which is how receptive to loris conservation are people in Indonesia? And are they sympathetic, or is it not a concern for them? I just wonder what you think about that and what your experience is now after doing all the trade, even not just loris, but trade of other animals.
Yeah, I would say the big animals conservation is more receptive to Indonesian people. They would recognize more kind of tiger, orangutan, rhinoceros than very small, this small creature animal. And yeah, and also it's also reflected in our education as well. There are not so many school or universities in conservation like, subject that teach us about this kind of other animals. Even like when I say that my work is focused on loris, and I show them a picture that is it a koala? No, just related to more animal that similar to like the recognizable animals. So yeah, that's why I would say not so many people other than conservation people know loris.
Well, that goes back to nobody really cares about lorises anywhere. So I do think, though, it's a very interesting. I think once you know about it, you have to be aware to care. So that's one of our jobs, is to make people aware of the animals so they care about the animals. When do you have to go, actually? How many more minutes do you have?
4 minutes, yeah.
Okay, does anyone else, I'm going to see, there's lots of questions for me, but I'm seeing if there's any questions for you before you go. Not yet. People are still shy. So, but I do think it's so we have a number of papers that we wrote with Ahmad that are about wildlife trade, and a number of them are open access. So they're not all about lorises, they're also about songbirds, because we have this Indonesian or South Asian songbird crisis. And so if you're interested in his work, we can share some links maybe later and you could read some of the papers.
Okay.
But thank you for joining us, and I may, and if there's any other questions, I could always email them to you as well.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Sorry.
Thank you. Have fun at class.
Yeah.
Joining. And so I think I'm gonna answer, maybe I answer 1 or 2 questions, Marco, because there's a few now, and then you can show your slides, and then so we kind of pop between ecology and farming and that sort of thing. So the first question was about the eyesight. Lorises are monochromatic, so when we think of aposematic signals, we think of bright colors, but we can also have like incredible contrast. So they are seeing each other in heavy contrast. So it's black and white. In our analysis, we looked at trichromatic, dichromatic, and monochromatic. So we used a color changing software. And in fact, the main differences are not in the trichromatic, it's in the monochromatic. And it's another reason we decided they were aposematic signals, because they would be seeing it, identifying it with each other, but a predator who is a trichromatic predator wouldn't necessarily see the differences as much as you see them in black and white. So that answers hopefully that question. The next question was, yeah, growing up slowly. What is the lifespan in the wild? So this is a really great question. It's been a very, I don't know, exciting time to get to 10 years of studying these animals in the wild. It's a huge amount of work to have a long-term field study and to try to monitor and follow those animals, because even when they grow up and disperse, they might go several kilometers away, and we don't have the ability to continue to follow those animals. But what we know is, so in our 10th year, we have animals that were fully adults and already had offspring that were adult at the beginning of the study. So those animals must be at least 13 to 15 years old. So that gives us a minimum of 15. And amongst a couple of those animals, if you compare one, we would call her a multiparous female. She already evidently had 2 offspring when we started the study, and she's still around. And there was a similar female who died about a year ago, who was already incredibly old. Like, she had much worn teeth and a lot more scars, and was evidently older. So this female now is starting to look more like her. So she could have been 17, 18 years old minimum. So that's all we can say is what the minimum age is. We know animals die younger as well. They kill each other with their venom. They drown. They get electrocuted. They've been killed in storms. So there are other risks that allow you not to reach your potential longest lifespan. So hopefully that question is answered. The next one, I'll answer one more, then I'll move back to Marco, and then we could go back to questions. So why do translocated lorises die a lot of the time? Actually, if you look at translocation science, the IUCN Translocation Specialist Group has a series of books called Back to the Wild. And many very well-funded, very well-monitored translocation projects consider a 70 to 80% death rate very good. So they sometimes argue wildlife trade are moving animals, not just, and we use the term translocation now instead of reintroduction. So this, we're not talking about from wild to wild, like one forest patch to another. We're talking about animals that were in trade that are going back to the wild, translocated back to the wild. There are a number of reasons. Well, A is most loris species have never had a long-term study in the wild, which is the number one rule in IUCN translocation science, is you should know what the animal does before you release it. So in the past, they would say they would get a loris into a rescue center. In a week, it would be dead. They'd get a macaque in. A week, it would be ready for translocation. Again, there's this refusal to feed gum. There's a refusal to give larger cages. There's a refusal to understand the social organization. So you have animals very ill and stressed even before they're released to the wild. Or they may have had muscle atrophy because they didn't have a chance to move or climb before they were released. They may have actually had teeth, but they were fed fruit in captivity, and they got dental decay during the wild rescue center keeping, where they had fruits. And pre-release cages can work. The best release project that has the best success, that has actually followed most of the rules, is in Vietnam. It's called EAST, the Endangered Asian Species Trust. And they had a lot of deaths in the beginning, and then they really monitored why the animals were dying, and they tried to change things around. And it's to do the age of knowing the age of the animal that's being translocated, not releasing them into animal areas where there are already lorises, because they will fight with the local animals and kill each other. Making sure for a year you have monitored food availability in the area, making sure you've monitored sleep site availability. So a lot of people that have a loris, they'll go, oh, we have like a rambutan release project. Somebody gave us a loris. Let's just throw it in the forest. There could be so many things wrong with that. The animal could have a disease and could be released. So it could be sick itself. It could give diseases to others. It could have no food where it was released. It could have competitors where it was released. So all of those reasons are a problem. So it's not just a pre-release cage that seems to make a difference. And the problem with a pre-release cage is, in almost all cases, the animal goes quite far from where it was released. So the only thing the pre-release cage does is it allows it to at least be used to being back in a wild setting rather than a captive setting. Okay, we will carry on with questions, but Marco's prepared a few slides that I think will illustrate the wildlife-friendly coffee program a little bit better. And I guess, Marco, you'll just have to say next slide to me because I've got the slides. So I'm gonna do it this way.
Okay.
Hold on. Is it working? Yeah. Can you see it, Marco?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So how did it start? So when I first arrived in Indonesia, we started with interviewing farmers to understand what was the possible problems, like to convert to organic farming, because organic farming can be complex. So most of them are using some chemical fertilizers, while we wanted to convert them into using more organic. So the main problems are a decrease in productivity, because if you don't have high quality organic fertilizer, you have a decrease in productivity. So that is why most of the farmers that start with organic, they fail after 2-3 years, because they don't have high quality organic fertilizers. They don't have the resources for that. So that was an area to intervene on. And also, they had problems in removing pests. So they have a lot of pests that is called coffee pest borer. Is like a fruit borer that is going to coffee berries and is red berries, and it's contaminated the productivity. So it can decrease up to 30% of the productivity. And this and so we needed to find solution for that. And so what they want is they want high price. So they wanted to convert into organic to get higher prices. So they expected from our project to get higher prices with the export. And also they wanted help increasing the coffee quality, help with the fertilizers. They wanted training. So we started thinking about what to do, how to develop this program. And also we asked what are the reasons why you hunt or use pesticide? Because they often hunt civets, for example, because they go and eat in their coffee plantations. And so most of them said that there was a correlation, with thinking about wildlife give benefits and hunting or use pesticides. So the people that think that wildlife give benefits hunted and use pesticide less. So we needed to intervene on showing farmers that actually wildlife can give benefits for them. So for example, with the pollination, with the pest control, for example, lorises can feed on pests of coffee because they eat some insects, for example, or civets that can disperse the best coffee berries so that have higher quality plants. So all these were things that we thought about developing a plan for that. Yeah, you can move slide. Yeah. Yeah. So what? So then we met also additional things. So we need to stop hunting somehow in the area, because that's one of the first the criteria for the certification, and also that's a big conservation impact. So the hunting was already very limited after all the years of Little Fireface Project working in the area. So there was only a few hunting of birds in the area somewhere, and often not from people from the village. And also, we needed to increase somehow the quality of the production of coffee. So we had a series of meetings with farmers. So I had regular meetings with farmers, weekly. They are around 400 farmers in the area, and I had weekly meetings with small groups of them for around more than 1 year. and they continue these meetings even now. If I'm not there, there are people continue meeting with them, because that's very important, like to create like relationship with the farmers and also stakeholders like government. So that's probably the most important part if you want to do something about that, like have regular meetings and discuss the solution with them, because you often don't know the best solutions. They often know what works better. So for example, I got the information that the government was actually providing like funds for organic farming, and we applied together with them to get funds for organic farming and also trees, to use as shade trees. So that's very important, like to have relationship with locals, because they know better than you how it works in the area. So as a foreigner, like you might know more about the science behind that than the farmers, but they know more about farming and about that. So and so we took action. So we took training, we gave equipment so to improve the quality, and also we did a lot of socialization. For example, you can see me there with in the mosque, talking at the mosque, because that's very important, like to also to go like because they are Muslim, so they have like regular meetings to discuss about the environment in at the mosque. So you can go on. So briefly, like what we did is like we approved no, we didn't approve, we designed like together with the population, like the hunting and littering law, and they took it together and brought it to the government side, so it's now approved. So but we didn't want like to act as we designed that. We let the farmers do that. Otherwise it would have seen like as an imposition from the foreigner, like to have an hunting law. So we tried to keep like separated. We just were like as a consultants, let's say. And then we organized like a regional workshop to promote like our farmers and to integrate our farmers with all the other experts in the region, like in Java. And we invited people from the university, from the government, and also our lead farmers went to talk. So that was important to empower them. We organized international yacht camps with the farmers. So with people from around the world, students from around the world, like coming to see the farms and to visit them and to talk about wildlife-friendly coffee. And we, for example, obtained more than 30,000 trees from the government, like to use as shade trees inside coffee plantations, so that we can improve the quality of coffee and also increase the wildlife connectivity, for example, for the wildlife to increase pollinators. So there is a lot of benefits to have a shade-grown coffee. So that's a bit of background, briefly. And I see like one question about the pest behavior of lorises. They actually don't. They actually help the farmers because they pollinate some trees and they eat the insects. So they can eat some insects that are pests somehow at the farming, like crickets that they eat like the leaves of the coffee, for example. So they don't see them as pests. Yeah. And we are trying, as I showed you, we are trying to show that the wildlife is actually giving benefits to the farmers in general. So that is what we are doing, like having regular meetings with them, like to try to tell them that wildlife is important. Yeah.
And I do know in a few other sites, like one of our partner sites in Sumatra, they did mention that some people perceive of the lorises as pests. And they see the lorises in the crops and think that they're eating the crop, when in fact they're not. They're eating the pests, that they're eating the insect pests. So it's very important. This is where outreach is very important, to get that message across and to be able to stop any kind of killing behavior for an animal, especially when it's really not doing any harm. It's just a perception that it's doing harm. So that luckily that hasn't happened at our site, but we know that it's happened in some colleagues' sites. I guess we have 15 minutes left. So I think what we can do is just keep going through the questions, or yeah? Is that it?
I had a question.
Yeah.
About the protein. It's so similar to cat dander protein. Why does it necrotize in lorises, whereas it doesn't necrotize with cats? Can you explain the similarities and differences between the cat dander versus loris protein?
Okay, so when we look at the compounds in loris venom, one of them is FeLD1, which is the same protein that is found in cats. And we do know that is an allergen, and that people made a big deal of this because it is one of the identified allergens. There are a lot of proteins in the loris venom that are not in cats, so they have their own unique profile in their venom. And a lot of those proteins don't have a name. We were doing research to try to understand the reactions of the saliva and the brachial gland exudate and them combined together. We had a lot of problems getting export permits from Indonesia to Australia, where my colleague is a venom expert and was going to do the experiments. Some of the preliminary work he was able to extract because things got frozen and unfrozen. When you have an animal at a zoo, for example, and it gives a venom sample, it may not feel threatened and it may not actually be giving any venom in its saliva or in its brachial oil. It has to it can meter its venom, so it can decide how much it's going to deliver. So you really need an animal in a more of a wild condition where it kind of wants to kill you. But what we did find is that one of the other factors in saliva that is not in the brachial gland exudate is a factor that causes extreme pain. So yeah, so they also have a protein, or it's more of a compound in their saliva. So there's the pain element, and then when it's combined, it's a very unique system how the two combine. They lick their brachial gland, they then combine the saliva, it pools in their mouth, and then it is injected through the tooth comb. And the combination is the thing that causes necrosis. So you have a cytotoxin, and basically that falls into the cytotoxin family.
Oh, that's very.
We need to know more, but we need more from good samples. So we're trying now to do it in Indonesia. And there are some rules that have changed, and it's very complicated to get samples, basically, or even to be allowed to analyze the samples, even if you're allowed to collect them. But there will be more answers coming. And we actually did compare to lemurs, and the lemurs are nothing like lorises. And interestingly, 15 million years ago, lorises arrived in Asia, and that is also seems to be when they started heavily eating gums, because there were a lot of gum producing trees that were present at the time. And if you go to my colleague working in India, for example, which is a more pristine habitat where lorises eat 17 kinds of gums, these are gums that would give your skin 3rd-degree burns. So for a loris to put that gum into its mouth, they have enlarged salivary glands, and the molecules in their saliva are enlarged, and it actually seems to be able partially to process incredibly toxic gums, and then it in turn seems to have maybe modified their saliva to give it these properties, which is why it's lorises and not slow lorises and not slender lorises.
Interesting. And about 20 million years ago, cobras evolved, so that would seem to kind of fit. So
yeah, and cobras went to Southeast Asia. Well, they went in 2 waves, 15 and 2, so 15 million and 2. So that's interesting.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm still going through all of these. Thank you guys for all the questions. We now have. Okay, yeah. So would it sicken potential predators? We did some disgust tests with the venom to see if predators avoided lorises, and actually the one that didn't was orangutans. Orangutans ate everything in our sample. They even ate the GoPro in the basket with the loris samples, and we had to get our SD card out of orangutan poop. But sun bears ran away from slow loris venom experiments, and so did leopards. So I think that it does smell very strongly. The thing is that nocturnal predators are dealing with lorises in a different way than diurnal ones, because orangutans basically get a sleeping slow loris in a camouflage ball and grab it and eat it, whereas the nocturnal predators like sun bears and leopards have to fight the loris. So I think there's a slight difference there. But I do believe if a loris actually was able to bite an orangutan, the orangutan could have the anaphylactic shock effects that humans have. Aggressive behavior with how, oh, okay, this is a good question. Hey, is there any correlation between how aggressive a loris is with how often the loris engages in play? I don't know if that's a fixed question. That's a paper that we have in review right now, and we've just finished the revisions. And we do believe that their play behavior is kind of a practice for their aggressive behavior, because they have an unusual bipedal hanging position that is used only for play and for aggressive fighting. And it's a really weird position where the loris hangs upside down, puts its arms above its head like a snake, and goes ah with its mouth open. And so it's not how often it engages in play, but we do believe that play behavior is an important practice for aggression. This is a really good question. This is a nice way to bring in slender lorises. How much do lorises rely on scent communication? So I spent about 10 years studying slender lorises in the wild, and now I've been studying slow lorises in the wild for about 20 years or something. And slender lorises were scent marking relatively frequently, at least that you could see it. You could see them urine marking, you could see them scent marking. Again, working with slender lorises in captivity, certainly slow lorises scent mark, but slender lorises scent mark all the time. Pygmy lorises scent mark more than slow lorises. Slow lorises, we rarely ever see them scent marking in the wild. They scent mark their gum. So they have glands in their face and they rub it against where they're feeding on gum. And we think it either allows young ones to know they should eat the gum, or it marks it for older ones. This is my gum, stay away from my gum. Whereas slender lorises, you can almost count the times they did little urine dropping and urine washing. Never seen a slow loris urine wash. Galagos urine wash. But pygmy and slow lorises don't urine wash. So I think for some reason, I don't know why, we just don't see it. It is difficult seeing this stuff at night, but with slender lorises, I saw scent marking all the time. And with slow lorises, I've hardly ever seen it. And it's something that rarely comes up on our data sheets. Are there any breeding programs for slender lorises? It's Loris liticarianus. That program started in the 80s, and that's relatively successful. It started with 9 founders, and now those animals are all over the world in zoos. There is no red slender loris breeding program anymore. There's a few random ones, but they're not in a breeding program. They've just started a Bengal slow loris breeding program, and there's like a plan to get Bengal slow lorises from all over. But the problem is that there might be multiple species, so we have to be really careful. And then also, yeah, there's a really good pygmy loris. Pygmy loris is the best breeding program. There's a suggestion there's 2 pygmy loris species, so that could also cause some problems. Let's see. Okay, we have a question about crop rating. Marco answered that. Aggressive.
Yeah, we have the last one, like on.
Yeah, do you want to answer
Okay.
the pollinator one, Marco?
Which one?
The one on pollination? What is the efficacy of lorises as pollinators?
I don't see that.
Oh, maybe it's just to me. Oh, it's to me, sorry. Well, I can read it and you could what is that? What is the efficacy of lorises as pollinators in their forest ecology? Does this information help their conservation, as they would be helpful for reforestation, farming, and the health of the forest? So, although in the case of our Javan slow lorises, I can answer this question because they're in the wet season. Nectar is one of their main foods, and they are definitely pollinators. So we had a PhD student, Katie Reinhardt, working on even looking at the actual molecules of pollen and how lorises could facilitate their pollination. And yeah, they feed on hundreds of flowers a night, and it's one of the main things in the storybook we wrote was talking about lorises as pollinators and that being a potential importance for local people, and I think even in a non-fragmented forest, understanding because they have a very long tongue. They have one of the longest tongues of the primates, and they have an undertongue, which people have always argued cleans the tooth comb, but it may also gather pollen. And it gets all over their face as well. They're very cute. They have pollen all over their face, and then they shove their face in other flowers. So we know in the study in Malaysia of greater slow lorises, these huge trumpeter flowers they were feeding on. There's a study now in Langkawi where they're feeding on those flowers. So I know that throughout their range, this pollen is very important. So it's definitely something we put in our own work. And then based on your own experiences, what advice do you have for students interested in studying a species with very little pre-existing research on it? So when I started working on lorises, there was virtually nothing known of any type of loris. And we're now actually trying to do similar studies on anguantibos, which are the African slender loris. And we had a student, I put up her picture of her master's. She did try to do some preliminary work, trying to see if it was possible to study them in Central African Republic. These days, I think it's easier than it ever was before, because you can go on to like Flickr or different photo sharing websites where people are sharing wild photos and try to find places the animals exist in the wild. You might see if there's another study going on of any other species there. It doesn't have to be primates. In fact, it's probably better if it's not. Like if someone's studying elephants or insects or trees at that site, you could say, oh, I would love to go there. Do you have a field station there? And how safe, in my case, how safe is it to work at night? But there's plenty of primates that are diurnal that have never been studied before. You should look at a close relative of that primate. It's amazing how much we can learn from captivity if they happen to be in captivity, or if a close relative is in captivity. And in a field, how would you say, a preliminary field study, what I've done every time I wanted to start a new project. So I had a study in India, a study in Sri Lanka, a study in Cambodia, a study in Java. I think those are the main ones, where we didn't have a study site at all. And we had to, in the case of Cambodia, look for an entire year to find a place suitable to study pygmy lorises. That was research done by my PhD student, Carly Starr, where we thought they were largely extinct in the west of Cambodia. So she found virtually none. So she ended up in the east, where they were virtually extinct. And when we actually went into the forest, they would say, if you see one, I really need it for medicine. Can you please bring it to me? So you have to think about that as well, like why your species hasn't been studied, and ethically if it's going to make its conservation worse if you do study it. But yeah, and museum specimens as well, seeing where people actually collected the animals, and then you can go around. That's what we did in Sri Lanka. And actually, I studied hammerhead fruit bats many years ago in Senegal. And the way we went to find hammerhead fruit bat sites was to get museum specimens and then write them all down. There was no Google then or anything, and we just took a map and drove around Senegal looking for hammerhead fruit bats based on museum specimens. And then interviewing local people, traditional ecological knowledge. Once you get there, have you ever seen this thing? And do you know where it is? What is the efficacy? Oh, we read that one. Ecophobia. How do you give people practical tasks that they can do to help? You mentioned children, but do you take the same approach with adults? Do you think it's better to encourage interest rather than sad facts about population declines? In general, the education literature about conservation tries to be hopeful. There's a new move called conservation optimism, or the IUCN green list as opposed to the red list, what's getting better instead of what's disappearing. I think if people think it's hopeless, that the majority of people don't want to help, I think you have passionate people who want to study a species that will do it no matter what. But the people they are communicating with that need to sort of change their behavior to study the species, this optimism and ecophilia is incredibly important. And they say you can't know, you can't love something till you know what it is. You need to know about it before you know all its problems. And I think that's about anything. Like if you met some person you wanted to date and you found out everything terrible about them before you knew any of the nice stuff, you'd be like, ugh, get away. But you know, if you learned how lovely they were and then you find they have some faults, you're like, it's okay, I love you anyway, you have faults. So if we think of that and apply that to conservation, it's kind of similar. You want to know the amazing things about the animals before, you know, or you want to approach it in an ecophilic way, I suppose is the way to go. Do you have any comments on that, Marco?
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, it's important, like to understand also what local people think. So I think it's very important, like, to understand local beliefs. So to approach like in a scientific way as well, like not to be too scared, like to investigate that that can be local practices as well. So, and that they might affect also how the local population perceive the animals, and that can influence the conservation of the animal. So yeah, but apart from that, ecophilia is very important, like for in
I
general,
do
especially for kids, for children.
I do think when it comes to things like the traditional medicines, that's much harder to get a behavior change, because maybe for a very long time people have believed that this animal is the only way. Like in Cambodia, they used to say Western medicine cures the symptoms, loris medicine or animal medicine cures the disease. So your disease will never be cured unless you actually took this traditional medicine. And in one way, we've always said the only way to maybe deal with that depth of belief about a medicine, other than scientific studies to say it doesn't work, but you could tell people not to believe in a God and they will still do it. You know, these are deep beliefs, is to make them understand that if they ate and killed everything, there wouldn't be any for anyone else to use. So to use it, to still use those things, but in a sustainable way. So then we get into sustainability rather than, you know, as a really important part of conservation. So instead of going, you should stop, you should never do it, how can you do it sustainably? And that would be a real adult approach to that question. We're at the end of our time slot. So thank you guys so much for inviting us. Thank you for all your wonderful questions. And I'll go and check Twitter and everything as well, in case anyone has any other questions. And you can visit our website, and we have tons of our research open access, so you can read to your heart's delight about slow lorises, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Thank you both for your presentation, and Ahmad.
Wonderful.